Hey there, is it sunny where you are today? Here, the weather soft's the kind that makes you open your heart a little more, the kind that brings back small memories that somehow changed everything. Today's story begins with a young woman, no money, no status, no connections, just a quiet hope in her heart. She walks into a gala meant for the ultra-wealthy, a room where every glance could knock you down if you didn't know how to stand tall. But in that very place, she saved a child's life, and in return, she was given a chance. Not just to survive, but to be trusted, to be seen, and to be called something she never imagined she could be, the wife of a man whose heart was wealthier than his fortune. This love didn't come loud or fast. It came slowly, slow enough to heal. Just enough to remind us, even if you arrive with empty hands, you still deserve to be loved with a full heart. If this story touches something in you, don't forget to like, subscribe to Snail Story, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of the gentle things. Now then, may I tell you the story? The Whitman bookbinding shop nestled quietly between two abandoned storefronts in downtown Clearwater, Maine. The scent of ink, glue, and old paper lingered in the air of strange, comforting fragrance that clung to Haven Brooks' brown hair. No matter how many times she washed it, at 26, Haven no longer dreamed of grand things. All she wanted was for tomorrow to pass quietly, for the shop to have enough customers, and for her 12-year-old brother Beau to live one more year. That was why she stayed in this town, working as a hand bookbinder during the day and assisting at the public library at night to earn a little extra. Every penny went toward Beau's treatment fund. He was counting the days until he might qualify for a charitable heart surgery they could never afford on their own. Haven washed her hands after a morning spent trimming paper, gluing spines, and stitching thread into personalized journals. She glanced at the vintage wall, clocked in 47 a.m., 3 hours until her shift at the library. Just enough time to grab a cold sandwich and hope the power wouldn't be cut again tonight. The doorbell chime jingled softly. Haven looked up and smiled as Ivy Delgado, her best friend since high school, stepped inside. Hair in a messy bun, arms cradling a stack of thick books, her face glowing like early spring sunshine. "You look like someone who just woke up from a 3-hour nap," Haven teased. "More like a 3-hour thesis marathon." Ivy rolled her eyes. "But Lisa and I brought you something weird and maybe a little crazy." Haven frowned as Ivy pulled a cream-colored envelope from her backpack. It had a faint gold-trimmed border that looked hand-gilded. The paper was thick, heavy, and elegant, something you rarely saw in their world. "What is this?" Haven asked, carefully taking it. "It's an invitation to the Easton Corporation's annual art gala," Ivy said, eyes bright with excitement. "It's at the Silverine Hotel in Portland. Tomorrow night, the company's known for funding medical programs. I thought maybe you should go." Haven raised an eyebrow. "Ivy, I'm not the kind of person who walks into a gala in a ball gown and drinks wine. I don't even own heels." "I know, but you have hope." Ivy placed a hand on her friend's shoulder. "I got accepted into the summer fellowship program, so I'm leaving Maine early. This invitation was given to an outstanding student in community development, me. But instead of letting it go to waste, I want you to go in my place. Who knows, you might meet someone who can help Beau." "And what would I even say?" Haven gave a tired laugh. "Hi, I'm a bookbinder here to beg for money for my little brother. You have an honest heart. That's more valuable than any business card," Ivy said firmly. "All you have to do is walk in and tell Beau's story. Sometimes all it takes is one person listening to change to lives." Haven looked at the envelope like it was an alien object. She'd grown up carrying burdens alone, never asking for help. But Ivy's eyes were full of hope. And Haven thought of Beau, of his sleepless nights, the hospital beeping, The prescriptions they had to stretch thinner than they should. But the invite has your name. What if they check IDs? Haven hesitated. I read the fine print. Ivy said quickly. They only scan the QR code. No one checks names. You just have to walk in like you were born to be there. Haven bit her lip. Her heart tugged between fragile hope and the fear of humiliation. But then she nodded lightly, like a whisper of wind. All right. But if I get kicked out in front of everyone and lose my beat-up shoes, I'm calling you immediately. Ivy burst out laughing and hugged her. It won't come to that. You're going to be unforgettable. That night, Haven sat alone in the small apartment she shared with her brother. The soft beeping of Beau's heart monitor echoed steadily. He was fast asleep on the worn-out couch, thin and pale. She picked up the envelope again. Inside was a beautifully printed card with elegant black lettering. You are cordially invited to the Evening of Light hosted by Easton Illumination in support of therapeutic arts and public health research. She set the card down and opened her old laptop. Carefully, she typed a summary of Beau's condition: congenital heart disease, surgical costs far beyond their means, a long wait list, and insufficient insurance coverage. She printed it, choosing the very last sheet of her printing paper, folded it neatly, and slipped it into her cloth shoulder bag, standing in front of the bathroom mirror. She tried on the sea blue dress Beau had once picked out for her from a thrift store for her birthday. It was a little loose, so she pinned the waist with safety pins. The dress was second-hand, the shoes were scuffed, and her hair was tied back in a rushed ponytail, but still, she smiled. A fragile smile, like a suit of armor made of paper. Haven knew she didn't belong in that world. But for Beau, tomorrow she would walk into it. That evening, the Silverine Hotel in Portland sparkled like a castle carved from light and crystal. The main entrance was lined with a silver-gray carpet, flanked by neatly trimmed cedar trees, while the salty ocean breeze whispered across the cold marble steps. Haven Brooks stood about 10 paces from the entrance, gripping the strap of her worn canvas bag. The sea blue dress, ironed flat and pinned at the waist, looked out of place among the glittering gowns and the diamonds that danced on the wrists and collars of elite guests stepping out of luxury cars. Every step she took on the marble stairs echoed like her own self-doubt. She closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, and whispered in her mind, for Beau. The line of guests was being checked in at a reception desk just inside the lobby. A woman in a perfectly tailored black suit stood at the helm. Her name tag read, Monique, VIP Guest Coordinator. She held an iPad in one hand, scanning each invitation with swift, practiced motions. When it was Haven's turn, she handed over the cream-colored invitation. She gave a gentle smile, trying not to show how. Her fingers trembled. Monique looked her over from head to toe. Her eyes paused on the fraying ballet flats, the safety pins at the hem of the dress, and the crossbody canvas bag that seemed better suited to a used bookstore than a charity gala. Name, please. The voice was flat, professional completely, void of warmth. Haven Brooks, she replied softly. Standing straight, Monique glanced at her screen, tapped a few times, then frowned. I'm sorry. Your name isn't on the list. This invitation was issued to Ivy Delgado. Yes, Ivy is my friend. She couldn't come, so she asked me to attend in her place. The invitation is non-transferable. Monique interrupted, lips pressed into a line sharp as a razor. This event is for official invitees only. I'm sure you understand. A gray-haired man nearby, dressed in a sleek black tuxedo, looked over at Haven with a smirk. Did she think this was some kind of charity buffet? A soft chuckle rose from behind. Haven heard every word, each one scraping across her skin like sandpaper. Maybe she's pitching some kind of made-up sob story. Someone whispered. Her cheeks burned, but she kept her voice even. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just have a story. Just a few minutes. You're not in our system, Monique said, arms crossed. If you don't leave, I'll have to call security. A tall man in a black suit, wearing an earpiece and a security badge, stepped toward her. He wasn't aggressive, but he was firm. "Ma'am, the exit is this way," he said, gently placing a hand near her elbow. Haven stepped back slightly, frozen. She glanced around the curious stares, a few people holding up their phones. Each look felt like a blade stripping away the last threads of her dignity. She heard a camera shutter click. I didn't know the invitation wouldn't work," she said through shallow breaths. "I just wanted a chance. My little brother has a heart condition. I have brought his medical papers. You can contact the official support email." Monique replied coolly, already turning to greet the next guest. The security guard gave a subtle nudge, motioning for her to leave. Haven lowered her head and stepped down the marble stairs, feeling like the ground was swallowing her whole. She tried not to cry. But then something unexpected happened. A sudden screech of tires cut through the air, not loud, but sharp like a knife. A sleek black sedan had pulled up at the edge of the carpet. From it stepped a man, tall, upright, his slightly wavy hair neatly combed, wearing a charcoal gray suit tailored to perfection. His face emerged under the hotel lights, strong, composed, and somehow familiar. The crowd parted like water around him. Every eye turned to look. He said nothing. He simply looked directly at Haven. His gaze landed with the weight of something undeniable. Something that reached all the way to the center of her chest. Then, before anyone could react, his voice rang out deep, clear, and commanding. "She's my wife? Is there a problem?" The space around them seemed to freeze in time. Monique blinked, stunned. Her hands shook slightly as she lowered her iPad. Mr. Easton, Miles Easton, the founder and CEO of Easton Illumination. The man behind the entire gala. Everyone held their breath, and Haven, she just stood there, eyes wide, lips parted. Wife. She had never seen him before in her life. At least, she thought so. But his eyes, they didn't feel like a stranger's. Haven stood frozen under the soft golden glow of the Silverine Hotel's front lights. That sentence, "She's my wife," still lingered in the air, like some strange incantation that had frozen time itself. Miles Easton walked toward her with slow, purposeful steps. His tailored suit hugged his frame, elegant, imposing. But when their eyes met, everything else seemed to fall away. His eyes, quiet. Lake blue stillness carried something that made her forget to breathe. The security guard instantly withdrew his hand from Haven's elbow and stepped back. Monique, too, stood stunned, lowering her iPad, her face caught. Between confusion and embarrassment, Mr. Easton, Monique tried to regain her composure. "I didn't know. I thought it's all right," Miles said calmly, his voice steady and low. "I understand. But from this moment on, if anyone questions her presence here, direct them to me." Monique nodded quickly, awkwardly. "Of course, yes, sir." No one dared stop them now. The stares that followed were a mix of admiration, curiosity, and suspicion. But Miles simply placed a gentle hand on Haven's back and murmured, "Come with me," as if led by an unseen current. Haven let herself be guided through the hotel's grand entrance. Inside, the lobby unfolded like a marbled dream, shiny veined floors, chandeliers glittering like constellations. Guests at the gala, donors, designers, artists paused to glance as they passed, whispering behind champagne flutes. Someone took a photo. Someone asked her name. But Miles didn't let anyone approach. He led her down a quieter hallway, just off the main hall, where the lights were softer, and the music faded into the background. At the end of the corridor stood a private room, its carved mahogany door slightly ajar. He opened it and gestured for her to enter. The room inside was warm and elegant. with dark blue velvet chairs, an oak tea table, and pendant lights that glowed like tiny embers. Haven sat down, her fingers still wrapped tightly around the strap of her canvas bag. She looked up at him, no longer able to endure the silence. "Who are you?" she asked. "And why did you say, 'I'm your wife'?" Miles sat across from her. This time, his gaze met hers with a gentleness that hadn't been there outside. "We've met before," he said slowly. 2 years ago, at Hollow Creek Lake, one summer afternoon. Haven froze. Her mind searched through dusty corners of memory. Then suddenly, an image surfaced. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, wet curly hair, arms flailing above the water. A crowd had gathered, but no one knew what to do. Haven, then fresh off a long shift and eating a sandwich by the dock, had jumped in the moment she saw the girl struggling. She remembered holding the child, pulling her to shore, pressing water out of her lungs, warming her with trembling arms and a soaked shirt. When the girl finally cried, the crowd exhaled in relief. A man had rushed in, scooped her up, and thanked Haven again and again. But Haven had simply shaken her head and walked away, never giving her name. "That little girl," Haven whispered. "Willa," Miles nodded. "My daughter." Her mouth opened, but no words came. "I looked for you," he continued, his voice now using you instead of miss. "I asked everyone there, but no one knew your name. A few people said, 'The girl with brown hair, a faded dove tattoo, wearing a white shirt and no shoes.' That was all I had." Haven touched her left arm. The faint tattoo was still there. "I once thought," Miles said softly, "if I ever got the chance to meet you again, I'd do whatever it took to repay what you gave us that day." She was speechless. The story she'd long forgotten was now the reason she stood here, in this luxurious room, across from a man whose single sentence had stopped an entire gala. "But why did you say, 'I'm your wife'?" she asked again. Miles leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "Because when I saw you being turned away like you didn't belong, I couldn't stay silent. In a place like this, people like you are always outsiders, lest you carry a name big enough to shut them up." He paused, eyes fixed on hers. "And tonight, your name was my wife." Haven felt something tighten in her throat. "You're not afraid they'll gossip?" she asked quietly. "I'm only afraid," he replied, softer now, "that you won't forgive me for dragging you into a lie." She looked at him. His eyes weren't cunning or manipulative, just grateful. And something else, something that looked a lot like respect. She exhaled slowly. "I don't even know what I'm doing here anymore," she admitted. "You're living," Miles said. "And sometimes, living means doing the opposite of being." Afraid? Outside, the music rose again. The chandeliers blazed like artificial galaxies. But in this room, between the two of them, sat a piece of the past, once lost and now returned, wrapped in the most beautiful lie she had ever been told. The small sitting room at the Silverine Hotel remained quiet, as if it was holding space for a secret that had just been revealed. Haven Brooks sat motionless on the velvet chair, her hands tightly clasped on her lap. Her heart pounded uncontrollably, not just from what Miles Easton had said, but from the flood of memories that rushed back, vivid and suffocating in their clarity. A summer afternoon, 2 years ago, she had been passing Hollow Creek Lake after a long shift at the library. The heat was stifling, and all she wanted was a quiet place to eat her cold sandwich and write a few lines in her journal. Then suddenly, a scream tore through the air. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, was flailing in the water. People stood around in panic, but no one jumped in. Haven didn't hesitate. She dropped everything and dove into the freezing lake. She remembered the moment she reached that tiny body sinking below the surface, the sheer panic that squeezed her heart, and the pale, lifeless face of the girl as she pulled her ashore. She had drained the water from the girl's lungs. wrapped her in a thin jacket, and whispered comfort over and over like she was soothing herself as much as the child. A man had rushed in then, eyes wild, scooping the girl into his arms and sobbing. Haven hadn't seen his face clearly. She just remembered him saying, "Thank you, I don't know what I would have done without you." And then she stood up, nodded once, and walked away as if afraid that staying any longer would mean giving her name. And she didn't want to be someone's story. Now, that man was sitting right in front of her, his eyes filled with emotion and hesitation. "Is she okay?" Haven whispered, her voice hoarse with feeling. Miles nodded. "Willa's okay. She remembers you. Even though she was young, she remembers the woman who pulled her from the freezing water, who placed a hand on her chest and said she would be all right." Haven smiled, a mix of relief and emotion. "I worried after I left, but I also figured I just did what anyone would have done." "Not everyone would have," Miles said, his tone steady. "There were plenty of people standing around that day, but only one person jumped in. And that person was you." Silence settled again, but this time it was no longer heavy. It was soft, like a blanket draped between two people bound by a memory that had nearly been lost. Haven looked up, direct. "So when did you realize it was me?" Miles leaned back slightly, thoughtful. "At first, I just saw someone being humiliated in front of a crowd. And I stepped in for justice, I thought. But when you turned your head, I saw those eyes. I never forgot the eyes of the woman who held my daughter and told her, 'You're going to be okay.' You had the same eyes, strong and gentle. And I knew I'd found you." Haven lowered her gaze, overwhelmed. She had lived so many years making quiet sacrifices, believing no one noticed. She had convinced herself she was invisible in the lives of the powerful. And yet here sat a man, like Miles Easton, recalling every detail of something she had thought was small. "But why, wife?" she asked again, barely louder than a breath. Miles tilted his head slightly, as if weighing his words. "Because," he said slowly, "that title was the only thing strong enough to silence them. I could have said you were a friend, or someone who once saved my daughter, but no one would have listened. Oh, you stepped into my world with a heart that's real. I couldn't let them mock that, even though I don't belong in that world. Exactly because of that." He gave a soft smile. "I spent years surrounded by spotlights and never saw clearly who was real. Then used someone with no reason at all to help my daughter, saved her life, and walked away, expecting nothing. You belong wherever you choose to belong, even here." Haven stared at him for a long moment in the dim light. The powerful man before her no longer looked like a multinational CEO. He looked like a father, a man who had once been broken with fear and now was searching for something he'd lost. She nodded quietly. "I never thought I'd end up being someone's fake wife at a gala." Miles chuckled a real laugh. Not cold, not calculated. "Well," he said, "fake or real, that's entirely up to you." The words made her heart skip a beat. Haven didn't know what would come next, but in that moment inside this lavish room, surrounded by a memory nearly forgotten and the honest gaze of a man once tied to a fleeting moment in her life, she didn't feel alone anymore. Asterix music drifted in from the grand hall through the barely open door, a violin soaring above the soft clinks of crystal glasses and the hum of elegant conversation. Haven and Miles still sat there in the quiet room that felt like a rare pocket of stillness carved out from a noisy, glittering world. Their conversation had ended, but what remained was a deep, mutual understanding. Miles stood and adjusted his collar, then turned to her. "Would you like to go back out with me?" he asked, his voice warm and low. Haven hesitated. The sea blue dress, worn and secondhand, her scuffed flats, the canvas bag over her shoulder, Edo still made her feel out of place. as if the moment she stepped onto the marble floor outside, the judgmental stares would devour her whole. But then she thought of Beau, her little brother fast asleep in their tiny apartment back in Clearwater, his frail heart in need of repair. And then she thought of the way Miles had looked when he spoke of Willa. She nodded. "Okay," she said. They returned to the main hall. Haven walked beside Miles, trying to keep her shoulders back and her chin lifted even, though her knees trembled slightly with every step. Eyes turned toward them instantly. Some whispered, some stared. A few looked confused, but most were just curious. No one dared speak aloud with Miles Easton at her side. He handed her a glass of white wine. "Just smile and nod. Don't let anyone make you forget why you're here." She smiled, even as her hands trembled slightly around the glass. Then, cutting through the sound of string quartet music and high heels on marble, a sudden voice rang out. "The girl from the lake." Haven turned. A little girl in a white dress. Her soft curls tied to one side came running toward her teeny leather shoes tapping against the floor. She stopped in front of Haven, eyes wide, sparkling like dewdrops. "You're the one who pulled me out of the lake, right?" the girl said, panting from the run. "You're the one who held me and said, 'You're going to be okay, right?' Before?" Haven could respond. The child had wrapped her arms tightly around her legs. "I remember you. I still remember. I used to dream about you and cry when I woke up. I asked Daddy all the time, but he couldn't find you." Miles stepped forward, gently placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Willa, slow down. You're surprising her. I'm okay," Willa said loudly, her cheek pressed against Haven's dress. "She's my superhero." The entire hall seemed to go quiet. People nearby, some of them, donors and distinguished guests, turned to look. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to something softer, something touched. An older woman leaned in and whispered to a friend, "That's her, the woman who saved Miles's daughter." A gentleman beside her nodded slightly. "So it's true." Haven knelt down so she was eye level with Willa. "You've grown so much. And you're healthy too." Willa grinned. "Daddy said I was saved by an angel, but I knew the angel was real." The words caught in Haven's throat. Miles knelt beside them. "Willa, do you remember her name?" "No." The girl shook her head, then looked at Haven. "What's your name?" "Haven," she whispered. "My name is Haven." Willa smiled again, then tilted her head as if she'd just solved a mystery. "Haven, that means a safe place, right?" "It does," Miles answered softly. "The safest place." Willa clung to Haven's hand and refused to let go. The murmuring in the hall had quieted. Few people smiled. A woman from the Medical Foundation stepped forward, shook Miles's hand, and said gently, "Mr. Easton, anyone who makes your daughter smile like that deserves to be here more than any of us." Miles nodded, then turned to Haven. "I think now you understand why I couldn't let them throw you out." She didn't say a word. She just squeezed Willa's hand a little tighter. For the first time in her life, in a room full of crystal and luxury, Haven didn't feel out of place. She still wore the same old dress, the same worn-out flats. But next to her stood a child who remembered her after 2 years, and a man who had never forgotten her eyes in the cold lake water. The gala at the Silverine Hotel was slowly winding down, like the final notes of a gentle symphony. The crystal chandeliers dimmed to a softer glow, and the violin music took on a slower, more mellow rhythm. Some guests had already left. Those who remained gathered near the bar or lingered in the hallways in quiet conversation. Haven Brooke stood near the glass doors, a glass of water in hand, her gaze drifting toward the dark stretch of ocean in the distance. She had smiled when needed, talked when spoken to, but all evening her heart carried a quiet tension, as if the real reason she came hadn't yet revealed itself. Miles walked up beside her without a word, simply standing next to her. He handed her a light coat, and she accepted it without question. "Thank you," Haven said softly. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his eyes following hers to the horizon. She was silent for a moment. Then, as if she could no longer keep it in, she set the glass down on the railing and turned toward him, her voice quiet but clear. "I didn't come to this gala out of curiosity or just to take my friend's place." Miles said nothing, waiting. "I came because of my brother Beau," she said, her eyes lowering to the floor. "He's only 12, and he has a serious heart condition. We've been on a surgery wait list for over a year. Insurance only covers part of it. I work 2 jobs, save every penny, but it's still not enough." She reached into her bag and pulled out a neatly folded sheet of paper, printed summary of Beau's diagnosis and treatment costs she'd typed up the night before. Without looking up, she held it out to Miles. I don't even know what I was thinking coming here. Maybe I hoped that someone in this room, someone might want to help. Just one look, one conversation," her voice broke. "I know it sounds stupid." Miles took the paper, his eyes scanning it quickly but thoroughly. His expression didn't change, except for a slight tension between his brows. He folded the page carefully and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket, then looked back at her. "It doesn't sound stupid at all," he said gently. "Actually, I think it's one of the bravest things I've ever seen." Haven gave a sad smile. "I don't want to beg anyone for anything. But when I see Beau gasping for air at night, I think if my pride is the reason he doesn't survive, I'll never forgive myself." Miles nodded slowly. He stepped closer now, only half an arm's length away. "I can help you," he said. "I have the resources to cover Beau's entire treatment immediately." She looked up, eyes wide. "Not as a gift," he continued, his voice steady. "I know you'd refuse it if you thought it was charity or pity." Haven's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. "You're right, I couldn't take it." "Then let me offer something else," Miles said. And now his tone was no longer just polite, was sincere, grounded. "Willa, she's about to begin formal schooling. I've hired tutors, assistants, therapists, but none of them made her smile like you did. You made her feel safe. That's something she's needed since the accident." Haven stood still, absorbing his words. "She needs someone who gets her. I need someone I can trust." He paused, then continued, "I want to offer you a part-time position as Willa's tutor and companion. You'd live at the lake house in Edgewater. Flexible hours. You can still work other jobs if you want." She looked at him, unsure what to say. "The pay is generous," he added, as if he could see the questions forming in her eyes. "Not because I want to buy your kindness, but because I believe you're worth it." Haven didn't answer. Right away, she turned slightly, exhaling softly through her nose. Everything had come too fast. The gratitude, the offer, the promise, and a glimmer of hope she'd never dared imagine. "You don't have to decide now," Miles said, his voice softer. "Think about it. Tomorrow morning I'll leave my contact info at the front desk. Whatever you decide, I'll be grateful I saw you again." She looked at him. Those eyes, once trembling with fear of losing his daughter, were now calm, warm, and steady. "All right," Haven said at last. "I'll think about it." Miles nodded, then turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the slowly emptying hall. She glanced at the large wall mirror reflecting her image. The old dress, the slightly crooked canvas bag, the tired face. But now there was a new light in her eyes, for the first time in years. She didn't feel like a stranger in the room. Miles Easton's Edgewater estate didn't sit atop a grand hill like the lavish homes Haven had imagined. Instead, it nestled quietly by the edge of Whispering Lake, a calm, green stretch of water about 30 minutes from downtown Portland. The two-story house, painted in soft cream with pale gray roof tiles, was surrounded by a garden of wild grass and rustling maple trees swaying in the morning breeze. There was something simple about it, something human. Not the kind of opulent display she had once expected from a famous CEO. Behind the main house stood a cozy guest cottage where Miles had arranged for her to stay during her time working there. Haven stepped into the room with a small delicacy citrilli, just a few outfits and an old journal. The space was warm, with a fireplace, a window facing the lake, and a reading chair beside a wooden bookshelf filled to the brim. She had never lived anywhere this quiet before. The next morning, there was a gentle knock on the door. Willa appeared. Hair a mess, face glowing with excitement. "Miss Haven? Are you awake?" "I am now," Haven laughed, opening the door. "Daddy makes great coffee, but I only know how to make burnt toast. Will you have breakfast with me?" From that moment on, all distance seemed to dissolve. In the days that followed, Haven slowly grew accustomed to life at Edgewater. She walked Willa to and from school, helped her with homework, read stories, and spent each afternoon exploring the yard or floating paper boats across the lake. Willa gradually opened up, especially about the nightmares that still visited her from time to time. Echoes of the near drowning she barely survived. "Every time the water rises in my dreams," Willa whispered one rainy evening, "I hear your voice, saying I'll be okay." Haven pulled her close, gently running a hand through her hair. She didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the most healing sound of all. Miles was rarely home during the day. His work often stretched into the night, but on the evenings, he returned early. He always stopped by the kitchen, loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and asked, "So, what strange experiment did Willa try today?" Haven would laugh, telling him about their culinary disasters, or how Willa had drawn her as a superhero mermaid with wings. One evening, after Willa had gone to bed, Haven was tidying up the kitchen when Miles appeared, holding 2 mugs of herbal tea. "Not wine," he said, "but it might help you sleep." They sat on the back porch together. The moon floated gently above the lake, and the trees whispered secrets in the wind. "You've changed Willa in ways I never imagined," Miles said. "She used to be terrified of strangers. What happened back then left more of a mark than I realized." Haven held her mug close. "I don't think I've done anything special. I just listen." "That's more than enough," he said, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. They sat there for a long while. Long enough for the sounds of night insects to become a gentle background hum. No one said anything more, but the silence between them was warm like firelight on a cold night. As the days passed, Haven realized she wasn't just growing close to Willa, she was beginning to understand Miles, too. He wasn't the cold, distant man his public image might suggest. Sometimes she would catch him staring at Willa playing through the glass. His eyes filled with a quiet fear only those who've known loss could recognize. One night, she accidentally passed by his office and saw him sitting alone, gripping an old photograph of his late wife, holding baby Willa in her arms. Haven didn't ask. She didn't need to. From that moment on, she understood that behind his composed exterior was a heart still mending. One weekend evening, after a simple dinner of spaghetti and garlic bread that Haven had cooked, Willa fell asleep on the couch. Haven was cleaning up when Miles came in, sleeves rolled, carrying a stack of dishes. "You don't have to do all of this," he said. "I'm used to it." She replied with a soft smile. Miles set the plates down, then turned to her. "Do you still think this is temporary?" She looked up. "What do you mean?" "Edgewater. This place, this life." Haven was quiet. She didn't know. Everything had happened so quickly. She hadn't dared believe it was real, let alone that she could belong here. "Some things," Miles said gently, Don't need long-term plans. Just feeling. Their eyes met, and for the first time she didn't look away. That night, back in the guest cottage, Haven opened the window. The lake was still like a mirror. Moonlight cast her shadow onto the wooden floor. Maybe she had walked into a place that wasn't just a roof over her head. Maybe it was starting to feel like home. The first wave hit on a drizzly morning, just after Haven and Willa had finished blueberry muffins for breakfast and were picking out a dress for school. The phone began ringing relentlessly from Miles's home office, and 10 minutes later, he walked out, his face heavy, holding an iPad with a bold headline, "Mystery Woman at Gala, Real Wife or Romantic Ruse?" Haven froze. She stepped forward and scanned the article. A photo of her and Miles at the gala, its eyes on her, protective, unmistakably warm. Beneath it, a flood of speculation. Who was Haven? Why had no one heard of her before the gala? Did she appear just in time to touch hearts by saving the billionaire's daughter? One malicious comment claimed she was a hired actress. Tabloid bloggers dug into her past, mentioning her former job at a local library, her old apartment in a low-income neighborhood. One even helpfully offered that she'd once been fired for being too cold to patrons. Tearjerker. Hoax, masterfully staged. Screamed one headline. Is she really Miles Easton's wife, or a PR move disguised as a miracle? A YouTube gossip channel posted a 10-minute video breaking down her expressions from the gala, frame by frame. Haven went quiet. "Don't read it anymore," Miles said, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "People like that are always waiting for a target. You don't owe them anything." "But will this affect Willa?" she asked, her voice cracking. Miles shook his head. "I've already ordered the media team to block every interview request that mentions her." But the storm didn't stop. There, 2 days later, an anonymous email was sent to the board of the medical foundation, where Miles served as an honorary advisor. It accused Haven of manipulating Miles for financial gain, claiming she used her brother's illness as a sob story to access funds. The email even suggested she'd approached other wealthy men in the past. There was no evidence, just cruelty. Miles's hands clenched into fists. He forwarded the email to Easton's internal investigation team without a second of delay. "I'm not letting this drag on," he said firmly. "Not just for you. For Willa, and for the children, who truly need help." That night, Haven sat alone on the porch steps, gazing out at the lake. The moonlight was faint, like her heart, neither completely dark, nor bright enough to call hope. She had thought the worst of being judged for being poor was behind her. But it turned out, even if you saved a child's life, lived quietly, and worked hard, some people only needed one reason to erase it all. "Who is she?" Miles came out and handed her a coat. They sat in silence for a long time. "Are you planning to leave?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. "Don't," he said softly. "If you leave, it means they win. It means you believe you don't belong here when you're the only person who never asked me for a thing, even after saving my daughter." Haven turned to him, eyes red. "I'm not afraid of being called a gold digger. What I fear most is Willa growing up and reading those things." Miles looked at her for a long moment, then nodded, his voice steady. "Then we won't let that happen. I've spent my life shielding my daughter from the media. This time, I'll stand between you and the world. Not for reputation, for what's right." A breeze passed, lifting Haven's hair gently. She looked at the man beside her, the same one whose face had once graced Forbes with a cold stare now filled only with sincerity. The next morning, Miles called in his communications and security teams, tracked the source of that anonymous email. He ordered, "Audit our internal contacts. No one gets away with this." Haven wasn't in the meetings, but she didn't need to be. She knew he was doing the right thing, not just for her, but for justice. That evening, as Willa held Haven's hand before falling asleep, the little girl asked, "Miss Haven, why are people on the internet saying bad things about you?" Haven froze. But then she leaned down and kissed Willa's forehead. "Because some people don't understand the truth," she whispered. "But that won't stop me from loving you." Willa squeezed her hand tighter. "I believe you. And so does Daddy." Those words, small as they were enough to make Haven hold on a little tighter. To Dot, it was a midweek morning when the truth finally surfaced. Willa was coloring an orange fox at the kitchen table, and Haven was packing her lunch, when Miles's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen for just a second before saying quietly, "Can you come with me?" In the car, Miles didn't say much, just soft music playing, and now and then a glance toward Haven as if weighing his words carefully. They arrived at a sleek glass building headquarters of Easton Strategic, where the internal investigations and digital security teams worked. He led her into a small conference room. On the screen were the anonymous emails, the very ones that had slandered her, and below them a name, Catherine Dane, Miles's longtime communications assistant. Haven's eyes widened. "She's someone I once trusted deeply," Miles said, his voice low. "She's worked beside me from the beginning, knew all my habits, how I handled crises. But I didn't see it coming. She saw you as a threat." Haven lowered her eyes. "Because I'm not from your world." "No," Miles said, locking eyes with her, "because you made me actually care. Catherine once hinted that I needed a wife who matched the brand, and then you walked in with a calm gaze, a steady voice, and a heart that doesn't know how to lie." He paused. "I don't need someone who fits a mold. I need someone real." The next day, news outlets released a joint statement. Easton Strategic confirms defamatory information targeting Miss Haven. Brooks was fabricated by a now-suspended employee under internal investigation. Miles chose not to name Catherine publicly. "I want people to remember you for what you've done," he explained, "not for who tried to tear you down." Online sentiment shifted. The hateful comments gave way to respect. Some wrote, "She saved a child, then chose silence." The world needs more people like Havenand, fewer who know how to fabricate drama. 3 days later, as the skies cleared after a bitter cold front, Miles came home and found Haven folding Willa's toys in the living room. "Maybe," he said gently, "you should take a trip back to Clearwater." She looked up, surprised. "Why?" "There's someone who's still waiting for a proper thank you. And a little boy who misses his sister very much." He smiled, and she understood instantly. That afternoon, Haven stood in front of the third-floor apartment she once shared with Beau. The chipped wooden door, the hallway still smelling faintly of sea air and wet leaves. It was a world she had once called home. She knocked 3 soft times. "Good Lord. Haven Brooks, are you alive in one piece, or did you get kidnapped by arms dealers?" The door swung open, and there stood Madge's silver hair, oversized glasses, and a worn cardigan that had seen better winters, arms wide open for the girls she'd always loved like her own. "I'm here, Maggie." Haven hugged her tight voice. Trembling with emotion, "You little troublemaker," Maggie sniffed. "You disappear for a whole month, send one lousy text, Beau will behave, don't worry, then vanish. I thought you were halfway to the Arctic on some black market mission." The scolding made Haven laugh through her tears. They sat on the old couch, covered with a forest green knit blanket. In the room next door, Beau slept peacefully, his hair a mess, legs sticking out from under a thin sheet. "You've taken care of him this whole time," Haven said quietly, her eyes resting on her brother. "If it weren't for you, he'd probably be living on peanut butter sandwiches by now." Maggie chuckled. "But he's been drawing pictures and talking about you every night, counting the days until his big sister came back." Tears slid silently down Haven's cheeks. "Sweetheart, I know you're starting a new life now," Maggie said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "But don't forget you grew up here. From little things, honest things. You're still the same girl I once carried upstairs with a fever when you were 7. That broke something soft in Haven's chest. She hugged Maggie again. "Will you come to Edgewater? After Beau's surgery, I want to cook dinner for you." Maggie's eyes welled up too. "If there's homemade apple pie, I'll think about it." That evening, as Haven and Beau rode back to the Edgewater estate, the sky was painted in gold and amber. The lake shimmered like silk. Beau, still half asleep, leaned against his sister's shoulder, clutching a paper airplane Willa had folded as a gift for Beau the Brave. Miles glanced in the rearview mirror, eyes warm. Everything's ready: his doctors, a private room, and even a shelf full of comic books. Beau mumbled, "Who are you?" Miles didn't rush to answer, smiled. "Just someone who's really glad to meet you." When they arrived home, Willa came running, throwing her arms around Haven before turning to Beau. "Hi, Miss Haven's boyfriend." Beau turned bright red. "No. I'm her brother." Everyone burst into laughter. Later, that night, after the children had gone to bed, Haven stood beside Miles on the second-floor balcony. The breeze swept through the eaves as he handed her a cup of mint tea. "You haven't said anything yet," he said softly. "About what?" "About whether you want to stay. Not as a tutor. As someone I need every day." She turned to him, her eyes full of things that couldn't be said in words, and instead of speaking, she simply stepped forward and rested her head gently on his shoulder. No words were needed, because sometimes silence speaks loudest when it comes from the heart. Beau's surgery was scheduled for Friday morning at St. Alara Hospital, home to one of the top pediatric cardiac teams in the Pacific Northwest. The night before, Haven didn't sleep. She sat beside her brother's bed, holding his hand. His eyes were closed as if asleep, but she knew he was just pretending, just like she was, trying to hide from fear. Miles sat across from them, quietly holding a comic book Beau had left behind. Every now and then, he looked up at the siblings, saying nothing. When the doctor signaled it was time to take Beau into the operating room, Haven leaned down and kissed his forehead. A pro voice trembled, but she stayed steady. "I'll be right here when you wake up." Beau gripped her hand one last time, then finally let go. 4 hours later, the surgery was a success. The doctor stepped out with a soft smile and said simply, "His heart now beats as steady as a conductor's baton." Haven collapsed onto Miles's shoulder, crying for the first time without trying to hold it back. Willa, wearing the little green dress Haven had helped her pick, ran up and grabbed Haven's hand, then suddenly said, "I want a big brother and a mom." Haven and Miles looked at each other. 3 weeks later, Beau recovered faster than anyone expected. He was back to running through the garden, playing water tag with Willa, and asking for pizza every night. Willa had even learned to share her toys, including Muffin the teddy bear, something no one thought possible. One Sunday morning, the 4 of them were out in the yard planting daisies. Miles wrestled with a stubborn shovel while Haven tied her hair back with a ribbon Willa had given her. "We're like a team," Willa said, sitting cross-legged on the grass. "No," Beau argued, "we're a superhero family." Haven burst out laughing, and Miles, who once believed he could never feel warmth again after his wife passed, simply bowed his head, hiding a quiet smile beneath his collar. That afternoon, they hosted a small garden party. Maggie was invited and came bearing her famous homemade apple pie. Haven introduced her as the closest family I've ever had outside of blood, and Miles bowed to her like a guest of honor in the Easton home. Willa handed her a crayon drawing of 4 people holding hands under a simple roof. "This one's called We're Not Perfect, but no one gets left behind," she said proudly. Maggie nearly cried. Later that night, after the guests had gone home, Bo had passed out from too much ice cream, and Willa was snoring softly on the porch swing. In the kitchen, Haven and Miles cleaned up together. The smell of apple pie still lingered in the air. Miles turned to her, his eyes as soft as the golden dusk outside the window. "Would you want to stay? For good?" Haven didn't answer right away. She wiped her hands with a cloth, then looked at him. "I already stayed," she said. The moment Willa asked if I could be her mom, Miles reached for her hand. This time, there were no flowers, no ring, no "will you marry me?" Just a quiet, unwavering invitation. Here you get to be yourself. No conditions, no proof required. She nodded. 1 month later, Portland Living magazine released its latest issue. On the final page, there was a small piece. No clickbait headline. Just a simple note. A family born from courage and held together by choice. No one argued. There were no more rumors. No more suspicious glances. Just a white house by the lake, 2 children, 2 grown-ups. And many things that never needed a name, but were always unmistakably there. Trust, forgiveness, choice, and love. Dear friend, if you stayed with us until the very last moments of this story, maybe you felt it too, that sometimes the strongest things in life aren't fame or fortune, but quiet kindness. And a heart brave enough to trust, even when the world tells you not to. Haven wasn't extraordinary. She was simply someone who didn't look away when a child was in danger and who didn't back down when the world tried to question her worth. That's what led her to a place where love, trust, and family weren't built on blood, but on honest choices made day by day. Thank you for listening. If this story touched something in your heart, please hit like, subscribe to Snail's Story, and leave us a comment, maybe about someone you love, or a time you were chosen, not for what you had, but simply for who you are. We'll always be here, telling slow, heartfelt stories for those who still believe in gentle love.